Okay, so conflict of interest. There's a couple of different types of conflicts. You have conflicts with your existing clients, and then you can also have conflicts with past clients. Today's topic is going to be about existing clients. I'll have another video on past clients coming up. The professional rules of conduct, ABA 1.7, governs conflicts of interest, and it has to do with representing one client that is directly adverse to another client. I know this sounds basic, but it can be very complex and troubling in actual practice. You have one client that may or may not have an interest that is contrary to another client, and they're both your clients. And so, and remember that we have to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. So sometimes when you're wrestling with these issues, you're saying, you know, as a lawyer, I don't really see that there's a conflict here, but as a layman, I could see how it might look that way. You may have a problem even in that kind of a situation. Let me use a really obvious situation, but actually I've seen this happen many times. I've never really understood it. Lawyers will agree to represent the buyer and the seller in a house closing. Now you think, well, it's just a simple house closing, and you know, everybody's friendly, the buyers and the sellers are getting along, the buyer's glad they're selling their house, the buyer's glad that they're buying a new house, they're getting a new house, the seller's glad that they're selling. What could go wrong? Well, a lot could go wrong. In the transaction, there might be some conflicting issue. Maybe there's a title problem. Could be a lot of things. You're asking for trouble by accepting to represent both parties. It could go through without a hitch. That's possible. But you're asking for trouble by agreeing to do that representation. Number two, you must have a system, I don't care if it's just basic, to check for conflicts when you're taking a new client. Now, with large firms, they have sophisticated conflicts programs, so that a new client comes in, one of the first things they do, especially if you have a large firm, the particular attorney is not going to know every single case that firm has represented. So you put the name of the client in and it comes up, no, there's no conflict, or yes, there is. But if you work for a small firm or on your own, you have to have some way of checking. And you're not going to depend on your memory. You know, I would remember if I had a conflict with this, you know, after several years, you're probably not going to. Some system to check before you agree to take the representation that it's not going to conflict with someone else. And there are going to come times you're going to have a good client, have a good case, and you look at it and you say, I'm very sorry, but I represented, you know, Mr. Jones, and in my opinion, there's a conflict, there's an adverse interest that you have to him, and I can't represent you. Now, you're going to check for conflicts on new cases, but the other problem that arises, sometimes in an existing case, you took the case, there was no conflict, and something happens in the course of the representation that now creates a situation where there may be a conflict. What do? Well, you have to sit back and look at the local rules in your area, the rules of professional conduct. Maybe you consult with your partner or some other attorney. I find that a good practice, at least where I practice. Sometimes you come up with an ethical issue and you're really not sure if this is a conflict or not. There's probably another lawyer in your area that you've worked with before that you trust his or her advice. It's just a 2-minute phone call. Hey, you got a second? I want to bounce something off you. Yeah, what's going on? Let me run this by you, run it by it. Getting that input from another lawyer sometimes adds a perspective that you didn't have. It's a very helpful practice. Also, you can represent parties that have a conflicting interest if they have informed consent. But this is really a very tricky area. It makes me very, very nervous. What the rules say, if you properly inform both parties of all of the facts and circumstances so that they can make an intelligent decision and they both consent in writing to allow you to represent both parties, then it's not a problem. But here's the problem that I see with that. First of all, if you're going to do that, you better have a very detailed, in writing, informed consent from both parties. I told you this, 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 and this. I told you this, 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 and this. This could be a possibly conflict here. After answering all your questions and discussing it with the other party, you've agreed to allow me to represent you. Parties, if something comes up, they're going to say, wait a minute, he didn't tell me about this. I wouldn't have consented. I just think, unless it's a case where worth a lot of money or there's some other reason you want to take it, I'd be very leery of that. Finally, let's talk about third-party payors. Sometimes you're going to have a client and somebody else is going to pay your fees for that client. It happens all the time in insurance litigation where, say you have a car accident, the insurance company has to pay for the tortfeasor. And so, you're representing the defendant, you're getting paid by this insurance company, but your client is the tortfeasor. And so, you want to make the people who are paying you happy, but you have to understand that they can't make the call here. And if you're in private practice and you have somebody, my uncle's going to pay this, fine, but in writing, let him know, I don't have a problem with you paying, but you cannot have any influence or direction about what happens in this representation. You are not my client. He is or she is my client. And if you make that clear, I think you'll avoid those kind of conflicts. So those are some of the issues and things that I thought of in terms of providing you with some advice about conflicts of interest regarding current clients.